programs. SNAP, starting its changes October 1st, and then Social Security right behind it on the 15th. So the central question we really have to grapple with is this. Do these changes primarily represent an intentional, detrimental double crisis that strips away vital support from the most vulnerable? Or are they actually necessary, maybe difficult, but necessary adjustments, aiming to ensure the long-term solvency and, well, efficiency of these critical federal programs? I'll be arguing that the collective effect here is frankly a punitive raise and a raid. It guarantees immediate harm and pulls support away right when people need it most.
And I suppose I come at it from a slightly different angle. While, yes, absolutely acknowledging the hardship that any complex policy change creates for recipients, my position is we need to see these not primarily as punitive, but as vital structural adjustments. Maybe call it painful foresight. It's required, I think, to promote efficiency and, critically, stave off an even graver future systemic collapse. If we focus only on the immediate short-term struggle, we risk obscuring the crucial need to ensure these programs actually remain viable, remain funded for future beneficiaries. The alternative to these adjustments isn't really stability, it's probably an accelerated catastrophe down the line.
Well, when you look at the collective effect, the combined effect of these October shifts, especially on folks like low-income seniors or maybe disabled veterans, it looks like nothing short of a detrimental double crisis. It's defined by, well, what the material calls a shell game. Let's take SNAP hitting October 1st. We hear the positive headline, right? Maximum benefits are going up, potentially, for a family of 4, up to $994. That sounds good, but that's the raise part. The raid is the new reality. Millions are suddenly subjected to much stricter eligibility rules, new work requirements. Seniors, who often have high medical costs, they might now only qualify for the absolute minimum benefit, which, after all the paperwork and hoops, comes out to about, $24 a month?
Mm-hmm.
That barely buys one bag of groceries. Yet they have to go through the entire application and verification process just for that. It seems almost designed to discourage. Then, just 2 weeks later, look at Social Security. The projected 2.7% cost of living adjustment, the COLA, for the average retiree, that works out to about $54 more per month. Well, that's immediately gutted by another federal program. Medicare Part B premiums are set to jump by over 11%, which is around $26.50 extra per month. That eats up nearly 40% of the supposed raise before the retiree even sees it in their bank account. So the real net increase is closer to $32 a month. These changes, they hit the same vulnerable households. Think about a grandmother relying on both Social Security and SNAP simultaneously. It rewrites their monthly budgets, their ability to keep up with bills, all within a 2-week span. It feels like structured, synchronized pain, and we have to acknowledge that immediate crisis.
Okay, I understand the focus on the immediate, dollar-for-dollar reduction, the $32 net increase feeling inadequate, but we really must look beyond that immediate figure and focus on the fundamental instability we are or should be trying to solve here. The urgency of fiscal stability, I believe, mandates these kinds of structural changes to ensure these programs are actually viable for decades to come. The undeniable crisis looming isn't just the $32 net gain. It's the 2033 trust fund cliff. That's the big one. If Congress fails to act by then, and the clock is ticking, mandatory automatic cuts kick in, a 23% across-the-board benefit reduction. Think about that. A $2,000 monthly check suddenly becomes $1,540 overnight. That is the systemic collapse we are truly trying to prevent. So to prevent that catastrophic loss, efforts have to be made towards efficiency now. Tightening eligibility for SNAP, for instance, is essential for targeting what are ultimately finite resources. The material points out that gross income must be below 130% of the federal poverty level, and there are stringent asset limits, like $3,000 for non-disabled folks under 60. This is vital, arguably, for ensuring resources are truly targeted to those in dire need, preserving the safety net for them. On the Social Security side, you have efforts like slightly increasing the wage cap, which pulls, about $465 more from higher earners. And these modernization efforts by the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE they're calling it. These are necessary steps to stop waste and, crucially, delay that catastrophic 2033 collapse. Without these kinds of structural adjustments, Younger generations, Gen Xers, for example, they're projected to need an estimated $150,000 extra saved just to offset future benefit cuts. We have, I think, an ethical and fiscal obligation to address that instability today, even if it's painful.
I see why you frame these as necessary pruning, maybe, to save the whole tree. But let me offer a different perspective on that definition of efficiency. These don't feel like surgical adjustments to me. They feel like structural cuts that actively dismantle the existing safety net. They make millions of people ineligible who are right now genuinely struggling. We're seeing this expansion of work requirements driven by federal legislation, by executive orders, now including adults aged 55 to 64. That's an age group traditionally exempt precisely because finding suitable employment can be incredibly difficult. And parents of children as young as 14 are included now too. Plus, historic exemptions for veterans and the homeless, they're being removed. This isn't minor tinkering, it's a massive change in who qualifies. And when we talk about efficiency, we have to talk about the human impact. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, estimates that 4 million people will lose some or all of their benefits this fall as these rules take full effect. So if the goal is long-term stability, is that short-term humanitarian cost, 4 million people potentially losing the ability to feed their families, is that politically acceptable or even fiscally sound in the long run, considering downstream effects? That doesn't sound like efficiency. It sounds like outright removal of support for people who are struggling, often because the job market itself has failed them.
That figure, the 4 million estimate, it's certainly a staggering number, and it absolutely highlights the very difficult trade-offs involved here. However, the expansion of work requirements is, as noted in the source material itself, framed by its supporters as long overdue. The goal, when viewed through that lens of long-term solvency, is intended to curb what some policymakers refer to as a dependency cycle. The argument goes that if we fail to establish appropriate criteria and ensure aid is temporary where possible, we risk accelerating the insolvency timeline for everyone. And, regarding efficiency again, the modernization efforts are really key here. Initiatives led by this DOGE entity are aimed squarely at bringing the Social Security Administration's, frankly, decades-old infrastructure into the 21st century. We're talking about digital processing, reducing massive overhead tied up in manual reviews, cutting down on payment errors which do happen.
If we can save billions annually just through operational efficiency and by tighter targeting of SNAP funds, that directly delays the 2033 cliff. If we don't preserve resources by targeting them better and stemming waste, well, we just accelerate that timeline, and that ultimately hurts every single recipient, including the seniors and veterans we both agree deserve unwavering support. The choice, as framed by proponents, is painful structural change now or a potentially massive, indiscriminate cut later for everyone.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly, perhaps from the SNAP work requirements to the other side of this double crisis. Social Security itself, and the efficacy, or lack thereof, of that COLA adjustment. Even if we fully accept the need for fiscal stability, the mechanism used for determining that $54 gross raise before the Medicare bite is, I'd argue, fundamentally flawed and structurally punitive specifically to retirees. The COLA is based on the CPI-W, that's the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers. Retirees, well, they just don't spend like urban wage workers. Their spending patterns are different. They spend disproportionately more on healthcare and housing. Healthcare costs alone are rising much faster than general inflation. The material cites 4.2% annually, while the COLA is calculated using a basket of goods, really designed for, say, a 45-year-old worker commuting to an office job. This basic mismatch means retirees are constantly falling further behind in real purchasing power, especially, as we said, when you factor in that 11% hike to Medicare Part B premiums that just gobbles up so much of their raise. We really should be discussing a mechanism like the CPIE. That's a proposed index designed specifically for the expenditure patterns of the elderly if we want to provide an accurate COLA. And furthermore, you have the legacy of the 1983 law that's pushing the full retirement age, the FRA, gradually up to 67. That change is now fully hitting people born in 1960 or later. That is structural harm baked into the system now. It creates a permanent, much harsher penalty for claiming early, say at age 62. What it does is force recipients to essentially, gamble on their health, their job security, their very life expectancy, just so they can delay until age 70 to try and maximize their benefits. And that's an impossible choice for many people whose bodies simply might not hold up for 5 more years of physically demanding work, or who face age discrimination in the workplace. It functions as an implicit benefit cut based purely on longevity.
That's a very compelling point regarding the CPIW and the genuine disparity between sort of standard worker costs and retiree costs, particularly that sharp medical inflation. It's a real issue. But again, we have to look at program longevity here. If the COLA formula were suddenly switched to perfectly reflect the absolute highest possible retiree costs, which, let's be honest, often includes expensive, specialized healthcare maybe not fully covered by Medicare, it would almost certainly instantly accelerate the insolvency timeline, possibly by several years. We have to balance trying to achieve accurate compensation with the stark mathematical reality of the trust fund status. The goal can't be to bankrupt the system faster in the name of perfect fairness today, can it? Moreover, when someone does claim benefits early, before their full retirement age, their FRA, mechanisms like the earnings test are, arguably, necessary checks to maintain the integrity of the contributory nature of the system. Now, while the current limit, $24,360 for younger retirees, where for every $2 earned above that, $1 is temporarily withheld, while that can absolutely feel like a cruel squeeze, as the source puts it, it is designed to regulate the payout before full eligibility is reached. And critically, those benefits aren't actually lost forever. They are deferred. They get credited back to the retiree once they reach their FRA. So it helps secure the long-term contributory nature of the system. This temporary withholding is intended as a regulatory measure, not purely an outright penalty, even if it feels like one in the short term.
I still maintain that the core issue weaving through all of this is the active restriction of human agency and choice, and it's being compounded now by both federal policy and state actions. Beyond these complex federal rules we're debating, you have state actions piling on additional, often punitive restrictions that directly affect the immediate survival and choices of millions. We're seeing states like Florida and Texas moving to ban SNAP purchases of what they arbitrarily deem junk food. This affects millions of people by dictating, often in very granular ways, what they are allowed to buy with their benefits. Now, while you might argue this speaks to system integrity somehow, in practice, it's a fundamental restriction on consumer choice and, frankly, food accessibility for the neediest households. It restricts flexibility. It makes that little SNAP card stretch far less effectively because maybe the approved foods are more expensive or harder to find. It forces families to choose government-approved foods rather than allowing them the dignity and the economic necessity sometimes of making their own decisions based on price, availability, and yes, maybe even cultural preference. The small benefit increase we talked about becomes almost meaningless when states are simultaneously limiting what can actually be bought with it.
State bans, well, they are certainly politically charged, there's no denying that, but they are presented in the source, at least by proponents, as potentially beneficial for public health, perhaps as a way to curb obesity or dependency on highly processed foods, things like that. In the broader context of efficiency, the argument could be made that if program funds are being diverted towards purchases that don't serve the core nutritional purpose, then tightening restrictions, even if initiated at the state level, supports the overall goal of system integrity and responsible spending of taxpayer money. But let's bring it back to the necessary foundation of the whole system: contribution. The changes to work credits, I think, are paramount to securing the system's long-term sustainability. The cost of earning a work credit is set to rise again in 2026.
40 credits, which represent roughly 10 years of covered employment. This mechanism is there to ensure that primarily only those who have contributed substantially over their working lives can draw benefits. This is crucial because Social Security is designed as a contributory social insurance program, not simply a welfare handout. Securing this link between contribution and payout is perhaps the ultimate defense against that looming trust fund depletion. If we allow benefits to be drawn without significant contribution, the entire system just collapses sooner, and that harms every single American who relies or will rely on that check.
Look, I think we both agree that the system is fundamentally unstable right now, and the material certainly confirms a serious tension here. Millions are facing immediate hardship because of these clawbacks and tightening rules. That $24 minimum SNAP benefit, the COLA being gutted by Medicare costs, the removal of safety net exemptions for truly vulnerable populations. That is undeniable, immediate, synchronized pain for people whose monthly budgets are already stretched incredibly thin. The double crisis for them is very real.
And I agree that immediate, synchronized hardship is absolutely being experienced by millions. That's not in dispute. But the imperative, as I see it, of painful structural reform, things like tightening eligibility for finite resources, modernizing the SSA through initiatives like DOGE to eliminate waste, carefully managing payouts to delay that 2033 cliff, is, I would argue, absolutely necessary to prevent the alternative, that mandatory 23% benefit cut across the board, which would be catastrophic for future generations and for those currently relying on the system for their full check today. We simply cannot afford, I think, to ignore the necessity of long-term fiscal stability purely for the sake of immediate comfort, however difficult that sounds.
What this October confirms, I think, is that the programs millions depend on are shifting faster and perhaps more dramatically than they have in decades.
And that complexity, the need to weigh the tangible, immediate human impact of these policy shifts against the absolute imperative of long-term fiscal stability, really requires careful consideration. It leaves listeners, I suppose, to weigh which perspective best accounts for the full scope of these deeply intertwined fiscal and social policy changes.
Welcome to the debate. This October, well, it represents a moment of pretty profound fiscal anxiety, I think, and structural transition for, over 100 million Americans. We aren't just looking at routine policy tweaks here. We're seeing the simultaneous rollout of massive structural shifts in two absolute bedrock programs. SNAP, starting its changes October 1st, and then Social Security right behind it on the 15th. So the central question we really have to grapple with is this. Do these changes primarily represent an intentional, detrimental double crisis that strips away vital support from the most vulnerable? Or are they actually necessary, maybe difficult, but necessary adjustments, aiming to ensure the long-term solvency and, efficiency of these critical federal programs? I'll be arguing that the collective effect here is frankly a punitive raise and a raid. It guarantees immediate harm and pulls support away right when people need it most.
And I suppose I come at it from a slightly different angle. While, yes, absolutely acknowledging the hardship that any complex policy change creates for recipients, my position is we need to see these not primarily as punitive, but as vital structural adjustments. Maybe call it painful foresight. It's required, I think, to promote efficiency and, critically, stave off an even graver future systemic collapse. If we focus only on the immediate short-term struggle, we risk obscuring the crucial need to ensure these programs actually remain viable, remain funded for future beneficiaries. The alternative to these adjustments isn't really stability, it's probably an accelerated catastrophe down the line.
Well, when you look at the collective effect, the combined effect of these October shifts, especially on folks like low-income seniors or maybe disabled veterans, it looks like nothing short of a detrimental double crisis. It's defined by, what the material calls a shell game. Let's take SNAP hitting October 1st. We hear the positive headline, right? Maximum benefits are going up, potentially, for a family of four, up to $994. That sounds good, but that's the raise part. The raid is the new reality. Millions are suddenly subjected to much stricter eligibility rules, new work requirements. Seniors